Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Series with me, Kevin Britz, proudly powered by leadershipbydesign.co, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me in today's leadership and coaching segment, we have a wonderful parent educator and parenting coach, Kate Garzón. Kate, how are you doing? Is that correct?
Yeah, you got it, Kevin. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. And Kate, to kick it off, let's start with tell us more about you and what it is you do.
Thank you. So as you said, I'm a parent educator and a parenting coach, and my company is called Guided Parenting Support. So I'm a GPS for the parents of toddlers through teens. And what I do is really help those parents to solve frustrating behaviors and to raise great humans. And I do that by focusing on relationship building, on understanding development, and on skill building. So that's kind of the gist of it in a nutshell.
So just to give some context, so I mean, because this is quite niche, and it's a beautiful kind of entry point. And when we initially spoke, I was looking for leaders and leadership conversation, and you've kind of moved that, and the conversation we sort of ended up having was the importance of how parents also are leaders, right? And we use leadership as this thing that people with titles do, but essentially parents are leaders.
Absolutely. Parents are the leadership team for their family, and they set the culture, they set the tone, they set all of the expectations. And so often parents come to me for private coaching because they want me to fix their children's behaviors. And what they very quickly realize is that they have all the power. They get to be the hero in that story through how they show up as leaders. But the other piece of that is that so many employees in every industry are also parents. So when they're showing up at work every day, whether they're on the leadership team or whether they're, in any capacity, whatever happened at home that morning is coming to work with them. And it's weighing on their mind and it's weighing on their heart. So the more supportive employers can be of those employees as parents, the better off everyone is. Because when there's healthy families, then the entire society is healthier.
So I have so much to tell you because just recently my daughter's turning 16. I'm going to share this conversation with her so she can hear it. And we were having, a conversation, and I said to her, I always tell people what a great relationship we have, and then she immediately said, "Yes, according to you, Dad." I was like, "What does that mean?" She goes, "You think we have a wonderful relationship. That's not necessarily true." So I'm like, okay, so hang on, let's backtrack. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Arrow to the heart for Dad there.
Yeah, completely. It's like, okay, you just broke my heart. Like, I'm just dying inside. But the long conversation, or the shortened conversation of this long one, is what I then realized is my immediate response was like, oh, well, I don't have a manual to be your father. I don't know, there's no manual to do this, Brandon. I don't know how to do that most effectively. I'm sorry. And then I put the phone down, and I immediately felt bad that I put the phone down and I left her like that. And I phoned her back and I said to her, okay, I'm being a better dad right now, okay? And you don't leave the bad moments to be bad. And I said, okay, and I apologized, and we had this whole conversation. And I said, my chest is even hurting because I have to say this, and I'm so sore right now, but you have to make up in relationships, and you have to get over your stuff, and you need to be better, and I'm being better right now, and I'm trying to be a better dad. And then her whole mood changed, and she was like, okay, Dad, thank you. But I mean, it's that kind of stuff, right?
That repair is so incredibly important. And I work with such a broad age range, right? The parents who are coming to me have kids literally from infant through, I think the oldest was the parent of a 27-year-old, and they were having difficulty kind of launching that young adult. So when you think about when a child is born, right, you have to do everything for them. They can't survive without you. And so you get into this habit of sort of, I'm the adult and I'm going to take care of everything, but I'm also going to make all the decisions. And I'm going to literally move your body when you're someplace I don't want you to be, right? I decide what you wear, what you eat, where we go, what we do, who you interact with, who your friends are. All of that is decided by the parents. And if you're not able to start making that shift as they start to get older and develop their own personalities, it really does impact the ability to have that high quality, relationship. And we know from all of the research in the last 25 years that the best protective factor against all the really scary stuff that can happen as kids get older and turn into adults, whether you're looking at addiction, mental illness, early and risky sexual activity, suicidal ideation, self-harm, all the stuff that happens, the best protective factor is the high quality, safe, stable relationships with those trusted adults. And if they don't get it from you as their parent, they'll try to get it from another trusted adult, but if they can't, they're going to turn to their peer group for that. And getting what you need, from your friends might be great socially, but immature creatures can't teach other creatures how to be mature. It's not how it works. So that's sort of that relationship piece is really, really important. But how that plays out in the day-to-day, whether that's leadership in your home or actually when you're at work, is the stuff that I get really interested in, because it gives parents actual strategies for their day-to-day to build those relationships and to build their skills.
And we are going to touch on a subject that was really interesting, but before we get to that, just from your perspective as a parent, why do parents also need to, because you say, the parents are the leaders of their family, right? Why do they need to be more cognizant of showing up as leaders for a family? From your perspective, because I think very often we don't think of ourselves as the example that these children will grow up to follow. We kind of go, well, I'm your dad and you need to listen to me, but second to that, I'm also the example that she relates to and she follows and she takes advice from. And sometimes it might not be the right advice because I'm kind of reacting and I'm not kind of thinking specifically, like in context to how am I showing up for her.
Absolutely.
So don't you just want to unpack that a little bit, just why
I'd
leadership
love to.
as a family unit?
I'd love to. So I could say things about modeling behavior and all of that, but like at a core, at a neuroscience level, in our nervous systems, right? Humans are born we're practically useless when we're born, right? We're completely helpless, yes. Right? And even as adults, right? You put a human against a lion, right? Guess who's going to win? And so, when humans are born, all of the prefrontal cortex thinking abilities, right? Emotional regulation, impulse control, frustration tolerance. We don't have any of those things yet. We don't have any executive functions yet. We really have survival things. And so at a very basic level, little kids need their parents to be the leadership team to actually build their neuron connections, to actually build their brains, because when a baby is crying, they can't soothe themselves. They don't know how. They actually require that calm, regulated presence of a caring adult. And when you hold that child against your chest, your heartbeat soothes them, right? Your breathing soothes them. Your warm, stable presence soothes them. That's wiring your neurons together to start to regulate. So when adults co-regulate with kids, they're actually building that ability in the child's brain. And as the child matures and develops, their capability to self-regulate grows as long as they have these stable relationships to continue co-regulating. And even as adults, right? There are days where I come home after a rough day and all I want is a hug from my husband, right? I don't want him to say, use your words or go to your room until you start crying, right? I want him to wrap his arms around me. I want to feel his safe, stable presence. And then once I'm regulated, then I can problem solve. So yes, leading by example is important, and modeling is important, and deciding what your values are going to be and how you're going to live those values as a family, super important. But at a basic, like, neural level, you absolutely have to have those stable, regulated leaders to build these healthy brains. And for a lot of us who didn't receive that necessarily, or we got it when we were tiny, right? Nobody ignores a
Yeah.
crying baby. But when we started to become toddlers and preschoolers, and we would sort of quote unquote misbehave because we were, experimenting with the world around us and trying to figure out how things worked, and we didn't have any impulse control yet, we started to get in trouble instead of getting that understanding. And that right there creates an antagonistic relationship between parents and children, adults and children. I was a teacher for 18 years, and watched it and experienced it on the days when I wasn't showing up as my best self. So
Yeah.
that is really a huge part of it, and it all connects to how people show up when they leave their house and they step into whatever their workplace is as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why I remember now, as you're speaking through it, why we had such a fantastic conversation initially, is because
you were very surprised that a parenting coach wanted to talk to you about
I was like, yeah, come on, lady, what are you going to talk to me about? and you mentioned the concept of, well, you tell us what this concept is, because when you said it, I was like, oh wow, like, and then don't you just want to unpack that, because I think that
I
is such
do.
a significant point. It's so beautiful.
So the concept that I discovered a couple of years ago, it's called body budgets. And I take no credit for creating this concept. I simply stumbled across it. And it's the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, who is a psychologist and a neuroscientist. And currently she's working out of Northeastern, but she's a fellow Canadian. So that's how she caught my eye initially, who's now living in the US. And so the concept of a body budget is, and if she ever listens to this, I'm sure she'll be mortified at how I kind of break it down. But the gist of it, as it relates to sort of utility day to day, is your brain's job is to predict what's coming and allocate resources accordingly. So if you know that something, if your nervous system is telling you something scary is going to happen, you're fired up, you're paying attention, right? Cortisol, adrenaline. You need to make sure that if you're walking down an alley, you're prepared to react if something's going to jump out at you. Right.
Yeah.
By the same token, when you're pulling in the driveway to visit your best friend, right, your body's flooded with these feel-good hormones, because you know that you're going to relax and you're going to be heard and seen and you're going to laugh and you're really gonna feel your best when you're with that person. Yeah. And so she sort of pioneered the concept based on all of her decades of neuroscience research. And then there's a child psychologist, Dr. Mona Delahooke, and she started applying that concept to children's behavior and parental interactions, and how looking at the things that boost a body budget and things that deplete a body budget, and how a human cannot respond well to what's happening in their life when their body budget is depleted. So I use their work as a springboard, and I started applying it a couple of years ago in my private coaching. And I didn't fully realize the utility of it beyond parenting until, like, some of my dads who are, these Wall Street finance guys were telling me, I go into the office now and I'm like, bro, you're looking a little down. Like, how's your body budget? Like, did you get enough sleep last night? Or, like, things okay at home with Lisa? Like, what's going on? Right? Like, it's so interesting to me how it has this really broad utility. So, as an example, as a parent, right, you come home from work and you're tired and it's raining, your commute was awful, you haven't eaten since lunch, you haven't had a sip of water all day, you don't remember the last time you peed, right? And you walk in the door and you trip over your teenager's backpack or your 4-year-old stuffed animals, and you immediately just lose it, right? You have a DEFCON 5 response to something that's really quite insignificant. versus, you know, on a Saturday morning, you're relaxed, your sun is shining, you're having coffee, the kids are happy, you know, you're hanging out with your spouse, you're eating, you know, muffins that your favorite neighbor just dropped off, and you get up to walk to another room and you stumble over that same backpack. And your response is like a chuckle, and you're like, oh, you know, those kids, they're not going to be little
Yeah.
forever. I'm going to miss this, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And that's really just one kind of example of what your responses are when a body budget is boosted versus when it's depleted. And it's actually got nothing to do with the behavior of the other person. It's all about where you are to respond and react. And because, using Lisa Feldman Barrett's work about the brain being a predictor, right? If you're showing up at work for a big meeting and you know that this particular client is a pain in the butt, in there, you know, you're expecting that this is going to be a difficult meeting, your nervous system is already amping up. You're already armoring up for battle, walking into that space. You're more easily irritated and annoyed. You're less patient. And that those feelings, those sensations in your body are draining your body budget. So it's in your best interest to recognize that about yourself and do some things, some micro things that you can do kind of in the moment to boost your body budget before you walk in, so that the meeting goes the way you want it to.
So, I mean, and I love that you use that example, because it gives us a nice kind of area to play in, you know, at home and at work. And I think I've seen, I don't know if Brené Brown points this out as body budget, but she does say, you know, she mentions this in one of her conversations in an interview, where she and her husband have this thing of like, I've only got 20 and he's only got
Yes,
20.
I've seen that. It's brilliant. Yes.
Right. And you kind of go, okay, cool. So that doesn't make 100. So, you know, so how do we then take a step back and create respectful boundaries to kind of navigate how we get through this next day or this next week? Right.
Exactly.
And I think that's such a beautiful and significant way of recognizing, when you see it in context to the body budget, and kind of go, well, my budget's depleted. I've only got 5 available right now. Please leave me alone.
Right.
Then the other person really has
to boost, right? You use that to go, wait a
yes.
second. Like, I don't have the option to tag somebody else in right now. I don't have an option, right? So I talk about it with parents, where you've really got 3 choices, and you can use this as an adult as well. You can proactively boost your body budget in preparation for something difficult coming. Or you can adjust your expectations, because you know, this is all I've got. So I'm going to adjust my expectations either for myself or my kids. Or the third option is really abandon ship. So like, that might be the day where you decide, I'm taking a sick day. Or that might be the day where you say, you know what, my kid's not going to school today because I know it's going to be a disaster. And I don't have time to leave work and go pick them up when they get suspended again. So I'm going to call grandma and see if grandma can come and spend the day with them, or, you know, figure something else out proactively to sort of regroup and avoid that impending disaster. You know, and the piece that for me is kind of most helpful for parents and for every human is that proactive boosting. It's the doing the little things, right? Sleep is the biggest one. We know that when we're well rested, we're better able to manage life. But if you didn't have a good night's sleep the night before, you can't go back and hope for a better past. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's things like hydration, nutrition, but in the moment, getting some fresh air, stepping outside for 5 minutes before your meeting and getting some fresh air, right? If you had a rough day at work, if there's a way to stop at a park on your way home and take 15 minutes and go for a walk in the park, I guarantee your parenting partners would rather have you come home 15 minutes later, refreshed and ready to engage and be, you know, to show up as your best self for the family, than show up on time and be a snarling, you know, grouchy mess.
Yes.
You know, laughter. Yeah, go back. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we instinctively do this, but we haven't. It's not an obvious thing, because, you know, like, I think of people, you know, in a boxing match, for example, you get your head in the game, You know, you have
Yes,
to get your head in the
absolutely.
game.
You
And
yeah,
it's that
you psych yourself
priming,
up for sure.
right?
For
And I
sure.
think we're already doing it, but we're not consciously kind of going, actually, do I have budget for this? Is my body like able to do what I'm about to do?
Right.
Right. And I think that coining of body budget really gives you a sense of going, well, this is a way for me to articulate to you how I'm doing and how much we've got to go on. And that's and also, you know, you could probably journal like my body budget's sitting, you know, every day is sitting at about 50%. And after 2 weeks, you're kind of going, okay, there's something wrong. I can't
Yeah.
feel this way the whole time.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so it becomes a beautiful indicator of self to kind of start recognizing how are you doing.
Absolutely. And, journaling, meditation, moments of self-reflection, the ability to just daydream, to just not pick up your phone when you've got 2 minutes to yourself and just daydream, right? Those are all critical functions for healthy brain development in kids and teens. But in adults, when we don't give ourselves time to daydream, that's when our default mode network kicks in, and that's when our best problem solving happens. Right? That's when you've been mulling over a problem all day and you can't figure it out. Or even something as simple as, I can't remember their name. Their name is on the tip of my tongue. Why can't I remember it? And then later you're in the car driving home and you're doing something automatic and it comes to you. Or you're doing the dishes and singing along to a song that you've known the words to since 1982. And it just suddenly like comes to you because you're giving your brain time. All of that is really good for a body budget. So when you like, the amping yourself up for something is amazing, right? We do it before, like you use boxing as an example, right? Before a basketball game, before anything that requires energy and adrenaline and cortisol to keep us really focused and really sharp, right? People who have ADHD, it's really beneficial for them to do something that amps up their dopamine and their adrenaline before they need to focus. But the piece that we often miss is that preparing to down regulate, right? To regulate our bodies so that we're not amped up when our kids come to us needing us to really listen, right? Or when we're going into a meeting where things are going to be delicate, maybe amping ourselves up to go in there and be a shark isn't the best way. Maybe regulating so we can attune with the other people's nervous systems and really listen and really figure out how this can be a win-win. Maybe that's a better option than kind of going in armored up and ready to win.
I think you've just solved my life's problems, actually. And I'll tell you why. Because I haven't had great relationships in my life, and partly because my body budget has really been depleted very often because I have my own business. But second to that, I'm also on the spectrum of a neurodivergent spectrum.
Yeah.
So I'm highly sensitive to noise and sound and light and everything.
Yeah.
So when I've had an overstimulating day, my body budget is sitting at like 10.
Absolutely.
And then you go home to a relationship and you kind of step into the front door and I'm like, please just leave me alone. So I end up having really bad relationships and negative responses because the other person in this relationship they don't know, right? And they don't know what to do and they don't recognize it. So I'm so glad that we're having this conversation because I think my story relates to so many people out there.
Absolutely.
As a parent, as a business owner, as a leader, as someone who leads teams, someone who leads people, all of those implications apply to how to navigate your body budget.
And you bring up a really, really important point, Kevin, because particularly for kids who are neurodiverse, sensory processing often comes along with that, right? Challenges with sensory processing. So you've got a kid who's just had to focus all of their attention at school on listening to the teacher, picking up on the social cues from the classmates. There's fluorescent lighting, there's constant noise, there's not enough movement, there's not enough fresh air, there's not enough of any of the things that boost a body budget. And there's an overload of things that drain a body budget. Focusing requires an inordinate amount of energy. and processing all of those all that sensory input is exhausting to a body budget. So those kids come home and they have complete restraint collapse, right? They're just, the only way their nervous system can reset itself is with a complete and total meltdown. And then the adults are looking at them and seeing bad behavior, right? And for those kids who had that and never learned, they were never given grace, for starters, and they didn't have adults who understood what was going on for them. They grew up into adults who saw themselves as people who had to mask their neurodiversity and constantly show up as neurotypical as possible so that they could succeed in business. And that is incredibly draining to a body budget. You know,
Yeah.
when I'll never forget, I have a good friend who has Tourette syndrome, and I've known her for decades. And when she finally started sharing with people that she has Tourette's and allowing herself to just tick whenever and wherever, how calming and regulating that was to her nervous system, because she wasn't constantly holding in and being on edge, right? And then having to remove herself in order to be herself. So when we open this up for adults in the workplace, whether you're a parent or not, it's a beautiful way to understand each other better. And it gives people a really common language. You can be like, I know we've got a meeting in 5 minutes. My body budget requires that I get outside for a few minutes. And people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Cool. You know, you're not being selfish. You are in fact providing the opportunity to show up as your best self for the team.
So it just occurred to me now, and anyone listening to this, please don't follow my advice right now. But I'm just thinking that is sometimes probably why smokers go for a smoke.
Yeah.
Because there's some regulation that's happening for their nervous system, right? So we know that the addiction.
When you're addicted to something, right? You need that. You're used to a certain level of something in your system, right? But it's interesting because, you know, we know more about addiction now, and we recognize that folks who are more prone to addiction are often folks who've had traumas, and so their nervous system has not learned how to regulate itself. So a substance provides that regulation. So it's actually a problem-solving method, right? It's not a great one. It's not a long-term healthy problem-solving method, but it is a problem-solving method. And so this is why earlier I was talking about how the quality of your relationships, the parent-child and adult-child relationship, sets the stage for avoiding a lot of those things. When your family knows how to regulate each other's nervous systems, when your family knows, I can be completely open about what's going on for me, and there are people here who are going to help me build my skills, not punish me for not yet having those skills. That creates an environment where you don't need those fixes, because nervous systems they're co-regulating with each other, and it really is a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm like, we could probably spend another 3 hours talking about this, but I'd be like, if you had to give us some advice that we could take away from this conversation, because for me, it's a bit obvious, and maybe it might not be for an audience, but as a leader, as a father, I understand why this conversation is necessary in both perspectives. But if you had to give us some advice for either one of those, like what are some of the obvious things that we can start taking action on straight away, that we can sort of take away from this conversation? Because I think it's so important that we actually know and hear this more often.
Right. So the very first thing is to start to notice. Start to notice who annoys you. Start to notice what annoys you, right? Some people call them triggers, but I heard a beautiful phrase the other day. A friend was saying things that hook you. The things that hook you and start you on a path of dysregulation, right? So look for those hooks. And yes, what you're going to say?
I just want to say that again. Stuff that hooks you on a path of deregulation.
Yep, of dysregulation.
It's a very significant, beautiful way of putting that. I think that's a significant way of sharing that information. Thank you.
So when you notice those hooks, don't just notice who is involved. Notice where you are, what time of day, right? The internal sensations, right? That interoception is really important. And the more that you start to become aware, I do this with parents a lot, right? When you notice your pain points, then you can proactively start to build those body budgets in ways that actually are strategic and make sense, in the moment. Going on a week-long beach resort vacation, not realistic for most people, but you can get micro moments of connection, affection, laughter, touch, fresh air, movement, all of those little things. And so when you start to notice, then you can plan. And we know that autonomy, control, and power are essential for human mental wellness. When we notice, then we have power to plan ahead and to be proactive and set ourselves up for success. And the more experience you have with that, the more your nervous system will stand down, because you'll trust, no, wait, I've got this. I can handle this. My nervous system has the space to be resilient and flexible. So really noticing is the first and most important step.
I love that, and I think that's a beautiful intentional position you can start with, right? Because then it's not something that you're unaware of. You immediately kind of go, okay, what is my hook? What is that thing that's hooking me? What is
Exactly.
what else do we need to take away from this conversation? If you had to sort of give us 3 or 5 tips on this.
So once you've started noticing, it's figuring out what is most easily accessible to you, right? Go for that low-hanging fruit, right? For many people, the thought of meditating or journaling feels too woo-woo, right? Like we have the data to show what it does for your neuroplasticity, for rewiring your brain. We know how good it is for you. But if that's too woo-woo, don't do it, right?
Yeah.
Start with a couple of breaths. Start with a walk around the block. Start with something, if you're a sports guy, start with finding a way to move, right? If you're, I think about a parent, I grew up in a blue collar family in rural Canada. And, if you're someone who finds yourself coming home from the factory every day, really angry, notice that and start to figure out what you can do in your own life just to stop yourself from snapping at people when you walk in the door. Just start with that one thing. Can I be less reactive walking in the door after work? Start with one thing. And that we build on our successes, but it also goes back to neuroplasticity, right? When you start to, the saying is neurons that fire together, wire together. So every time you have a different response, your brain gets used to doing that. So it's really about, where attention goes is where energy flows. And so it really is about noticing and then acting on, and do it in baby steps, right? If you try to do it all at once and you say, I'm going to keep my body budget balanced perfectly every moment of every day, and I'm never going to lose my cool again, you're going to fail. For sure, you're going to fail. So just those little, baby steps. And then to your point with your daughter, repair when you mess up, whether that's with a colleague, whether that's with a family member, a co-parent, a spouse, a child, whatever it is. When you mess up, because we're human and we all do, go back to them and say, ooh, I did not handle that as well as I wanted to. Can we talk about it?
I love that you bring that up as one of the points, because people sometimes step into that, well, I don't care, like that person upset me. But in that aggravation and that conflict moment, if you've had a reactive moment, there is a certain amount of guilt that goes with your reaction.
Sure.
So you leave there and you don't go and repair. And then it becomes this ulcer, this internal ulcer that sort of just sits there, right? And it's so unhealthy. That's exactly.
That guilt depletes your body budget. That shame, carrying that around, because that's what your attention is going to, right? It's sucking your attention, and not in positive, affirming ways. And, if you have an interaction with someone where you leave frustrated, the next time you walk into a space where you're going to see them, you're already going to be more reactive. So, by proactively saying to yourself, okay, what role did I play in that scenario? Like, that person might objectively be annoying, right? There might be something about that person objectively that you would not choose to spend your time with if you weren't forced to because you work together, right?
Yeah.
And parents find this a lot with their kids, right? You can't decide what personality your kid's going to have. When a human arrives in
Yeah.
your life who's either the polar opposite of you or so much like you that they're pushing all your buttons, right? You can't choose what kind of human you get. And so when you let that kind of fester, then your nervous system is armoring up for battle every time. And you're never going to, and then you're going to feel like, well, they're annoying me. They need to stop. They need to change, instead of looking at the power and control you actually have, for yourself.
Absolutely. And it's true. Like my daughter she just emulates who I am, and it's a big trigger for me. And then I get mad. I'm like, and she's like, but you do that. And I'm like, no, I don't. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. Having
Hey,
these little years.
thank you so much for having this conversation. She's a parent educator and parenting coach, Kate Garzón. Where do we go if we want to get hold of you? What's the easiest place to go?
So best place is to go to my website, which is guidedparentingsupport.com. And from there, you can get my socials, you can get my LinkedIn, you can get my YouTube channel, you can get my email. All the things are at guidedparentingsupport.com. So I do private coaching with parents, but I also run groups. I do workshops, do a lot of parent education with schools. Companies bring me in to support their employee parents. So there's really a whole range of ways that folks can learn and grow with my support.
Fantastic, guys. So, and all the links that Kate's talking about, we'll share that in the description boxes below. Kate, thank you so much for tonight, or today, to this afternoon. It's night for me, but it's morning for you.
It is. It's almost noon where I am.
But thank you for spending some time and having a wonderful conversation. And please come back and share more interesting insights, because it's been fantastic.
I would love to, Kevin. This is such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to let a parenting lady show up on your leadership and management podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.